My name is Som Kid. I'm 80 years old, and I want to begin with something that confused me for most of my adult life. I believed, with a conviction so deep I never thought to question it, that the way to have more was to reach harder, to push further, to work more intensely and pursue more relentlessly. I believed that abundance was something you seized, something you earned through superior effort and superior will. And I organized my inner life around that belief in ways I did not fully see until much later. I was always reaching, always preparing for what was not yet here, always in motion toward a future that kept moving back as I moved toward it. And in all that reaching, something very important was happening that I did not notice for a long time. I was closing. With every act of grasping, with every tightening of will toward an outcome I needed to secure, I was making myself smaller inside, less available to what was actually here, less capable of receiving what was already arriving, because my hands were too full of wanting to be open to receiving. Maybe you recognize something in this. Maybe you have worked very hard for a very long time and still feel like something essential is missing. Maybe you have pursued abundance in all its forms and found that the pursuit itself has a quality of depletion rather than fullness. Maybe there is a tiredness in you that is not physical exhaustion, but something deeper, the exhaustion of a life lived primarily in reaching mode. If any of that is familiar, stay with me, because what the Tao teaches about abundance, and what I eventually understood through long experience, is almost exactly the opposite of what most people practice. The word receiving in this title is not an accident, and it is not a passive word, despite how it might sound. There is an art to receiving. It requires something from you. But what it requires is different from what reaching requires. Reaching requires force, persistence, the relentless application of will toward a desired outcome. Receiving requires something that is in some ways much harder for people who have spent their lives reaching. It requires openness, stillness, the willingness to let what is coming arrive without grabbing at it before it is fully here. The capacity to be present with what is, rather than perpetually displaced into what is not yet. I was born in northern Thailand, in circumstances where there was genuinely not enough. Not enough food in lean seasons, not enough security, not enough certainty about what tomorrow would bring. And from that genuine scarcity, I developed a relationship with lack that was completely understandable given my circumstances, and that was also, in the long run, the thing that kept abundance from finding me, even when the circumstances of scarcity had changed. Because I kept responding to abundance with the same nervous grasping that had made sense in scarcity. I kept holding too tightly, planning too urgently, spending enormous energy securing what I had, rather than being present with it. And in that holding and planning and securing, the thing I was trying to protect kept feeling less like abundance and more like another form of burden. The Tao Te Ching contains a principle that took me many years to understand at a level that actually changed how I lived. It says, "The Tao does not strive, and yet nothing is left undone." For a long time I read this and found it beautiful and unconvincing, because the life I had known required striving. The people I had watched succeed required striving. The monk's life I had entered required striving of a different but equally intense kind. I did not know what not striving could possibly look like in practice. I could not imagine a form of effective engagement with life that did not have at its center some version of pushing. And here's what I didn't understand then. Not striving does not mean not acting. It means not forcing. It means not adding the desperate quality of grasping to every action. It means learning to act from a place that is aligned with the nature of things rather than against it. The Tao points toward a way of being in the world that is responsive rather than reactive, that moves with what is rather than against what is, that trusts the natural momentum of things rather than trying to create all momentum artificially through will and effort. And that way of being, when genuinely inhabited, produces a different kind of result, not necessarily more dramatic or faster, but more enduring, more real, more connected to actual abundance rather than to the anxiety of pursued abundance. Let me tell you what I eventually learned about the Japanese understanding of receiving. There is in Japanese culture a concept that speaks to something essential about this: the capacity to be fully open to what arrives, to give it genuine welcome without immediately converting it into material for your own plans, to let it land completely before deciding what to do with it. This is not a passive stance. It is an active form of presence. It requires the suspension of the planning mind, at least temporarily. It requires the willingness to be in the receptive state before moving into the active state. And in that receptive state, something becomes available that the purely active state consistently misses. You know what surprised me most? When I began to practice this in small ways, the first thing I noticed was how rarely I had ever truly received anything before. I had processed, I had used, I had incorporated. But receiving in the genuine sense, the sense of giving something your full presence before deciding what it means or what to do with it, this was almost entirely foreign to me. Someone would say something kind, and I would immediately be thinking about how to respond. A beautiful morning would arrive, and I would be already moving through it toward the first task. A moment of genuine peace would appear in meditation, and I would immediately be evaluating whether this was the real peace or just a temporary condition. I was never quite there, never fully receiving what was arriving, because some part of me was always already elsewhere, preparing for the next thing, protecting against the next threat, reaching toward the next improvement. The practice of genuine receiving begins with something very simple. It begins with the practice of letting things fully arrive before responding to them. In conversation, this means listening completely before formulating your reply. In daily experience, this means allowing a moment to be fully itself before categorizing it. In your relationship to what is working in your life, this means letting yourself actually feel the presence of what is good, rather than immediately moving past it toward what is not yet good. In your relationship to the natural world, this means pausing long enough for what is actually there to reach you, rather than moving through it as if it were merely the background to your planning. What most people don't realize is that genuine abundance is not primarily a material condition. It is an experiential one. Two people can live in objectively similar circumstances, and one of them inhabits a life that feels rich, and the other inhabits a life that feels empty. The difference is almost never in the circumstances. It is in the quality of presence each person brings to those circumstances. The person who is genuinely present to what is here, who has the capacity to receive what is actually arriving, inhabits a much richer world than the person who is perpetually displaced into what is not yet here, what might be lost, what still needs to be secured. The Tao teaches that water, which is the softest thing in the world, eventually wears through stone, which is the hardest. Not through force, through consistency, through the patient willingness to follow the path of least resistance, rather than imposing its own path on what it encounters. And this is a teaching about how abundance actually comes to those who receive it genuinely, not through superior force of will, through the patient alignment of your attention and your energy with what is actually present and available, through the willingness to let what wants to arrive, rather than spending all your energy on reaching toward what has not yet come. There is something profound in the Japanese practice of treating ordinary things with extraordinary care. The way a simple meal is prepared and presented, not as a means to an end, but as something deserving of genuine attention in itself. The way a conversation is entered fully, rather than as an exchange of information toward some practical outcome. The way a garden is tended as a practice of presence, rather than simply as a productive activity. All of these are expressions of the art of receiving. The recognition that abundance is not a future condition to be achieved, but a present reality to be noticed and honored. That the ordinary moments of an ordinary life, when genuinely received rather than processed and passed through, contain more than most people ever allow themselves to discover. I learned this most clearly through an experience that happened quite late in my life. I was walking in the temple garden one morning, in a hurry as I usually was, moving through the garden toward where I needed to be, and something made me stop. I cannot say exactly what. Perhaps it was the particular quality of the light on the leaves that morning. Perhaps it was a moment of unusual exhaustion that temporarily suspended my usual urgency. But I stopped, and for a few minutes I simply stood in that garden and received it, not thinking about what I needed to do, not planning the day, not reviewing what had happened yesterday, just standing in the garden, genuinely there, genuinely present to what was actually available in that moment. And what was available was staggering in its richness. The complexity of light and shadow, the smell of the soil and the plants, the sound of birds that had been singing every morning for years while I walked past them toward my next task, the simple beauty of plants growing in their patient way toward the light. All of that had always been there. All of that had always been available, but I had been walking through it rather than receiving it for years. That moment in the garden did not make me rich in any conventional sense, but it changed something in my relationship to abundance that has not changed back, because I understood, in a way that went below my ideas about it, that abundance was not waiting for me somewhere ahead of where I currently was. It was here. It had always been here. And the only thing that had ever been required to experience it was the willingness to stop reaching long enough to receive what was already arriving. At 80 years old, I can tell you that the practice of genuine receiving has given me more than any amount of reaching ever produced. Not more things, more experience of what is actually here. More genuine encounter with the richness that was always present, but perpetually bypassed by the urgency of reaching. And more peace. The particular peace of a life that is not perpetually located somewhere other than where it is. Tell me in the comments what abundance means to you right now, not what it should mean, what it actually means in your life today. And if this message gave you something to work with, stay close to this space, because the art of receiving is a practice that deepens with time, and having somewhere to return to makes the returning more possible.